They called him the Devil of Blackwood, a man so feared that mothers would hush their crying children by whispering his name. And she? She was Lady Alara Vance, the perfect debutante, the golden girl, the prize of the London season. She was supposed to be the envy of the ballroom. Instead, she was a prisoner in silk and diamonds, sold to a monster to pay a debt she didn't create. That night, under the cover of a torrential storm, she made a choice that would scandalize the entire British aristocracy. She didn't just run away from a royal banquet, she ran straight into the carriage of the one man dangerous enough to destroy her, or perhaps the only man strong enough to save her. This is the story of how she ruined her reputation to save her soul. The chandeliers of Carlton House didn't sparkle, they glared. To anyone else, the royal banquet of 1814 was the pinnacle of the London season, a dizzying swirl of waltzes, champagne, and the heavy scent of hothouse lilies. To Lady Alara Vance, it smelled like a funeral. She stood near the velvet-draped periphery of the ballroom, her fingers gripping her fan so tightly the ivory ribs threatened to snap. She was wearing a gown of pale blue silk, imported from Paris, with pearls woven into her dark hair. She looked every inch the perfect aristocratic daughter. Inside, she was screaming, "Smile, Alara," a voice hissed in her ear. It wasn't her father. Her father, the Earl of Vance, was currently by the punch bowl, trying to drown the reality of his gambling debts in brandy. No, the voice belonged to Lord Reginald Sterling. Sterling was 50 years old, with hands that felt like damp clay and eyes that stripped a woman down to her worth in livestock. He was one of the wealthiest men in England. He was also cruel, a man who had buried 2 wives, both of whom had died under mysterious circumstances involving falls down staircases. And as of this morning, he was Alara's betrothed. "You look pale, my dear," Sterling murmured, his hand sliding possessively onto the small of her back, his fingers pressed into her skin through the thin silk, a branding iron claiming ownership. "We shall announce the engagement before the final waltz. The Prince Regent himself has given his blessing." Alara felt the bile rise in her throat. "I need air, Lord Sterling. Please." "You need discipline," he whispered, his tone dropping so low only she could hear it beneath the swell of the orchestra. "You are flighty, Alara. My previous wives were fragile. I intend to ensure you are durable. Once we are married, we shall retreat to my estate in Cornwall. You won't be needing the distractions of London society. Cornwall, isolation, no family, no friends, just Sterling and his discipline." Alara looked across the room at her father. He caught her eye and quickly looked away, shame colouring his cheeks, but not enough shame to stop the sale. He had sold his only daughter to clear the ledger at White's Club. "I said," Sterling tightened his grip, his fingernails digging in, "smile." The pain was sharp, real, and clarifying. In that second, the fear of scandal evaporated, replaced by the mortal terror of survival. If she went to Cornwall with this man, she would not survive a year. "I am going to be sick," Alara blurted out, loud enough for a passing duchess to turn her head. Sterling recoiled slightly, repulsive of weakness. "Go to the retiring room. Fix yourself. You have 10 minutes. Alara didn't curtsy. She didn't nod. She turned and walked toward the double doors leading to the ladies' retiring room. She moved with the measured grace of a lady, nodding to the Viscountess of Berwick, smiling at General Holloway. But the moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, the facade shattered. She was alone in the hallway. The retiring room was to the left. The servants' exit, a narrow passage leading to the wet, dark streets of London, was to the right. Alara looked down at her satin slippers. They were not made for running. She looked at the pearls on her wrist. They were part of the price Sterling had paid. She ripped the bracelet off, leaving it on a side table. I am not a transaction. She didn't think. If she thought, she would freeze. She gathered her heavy skirts in both hands and ran. She bolted past a startled footman, bursting through the service doors and into the kitchen courtyard. The night air hit her like a physical blow, cold, damp, and smelling of coal smoke and horse manure. It was raining, a torrential London downpour that instantly soaked her hair and plastered the expensive silk to her skin. "Hey, you there!" a guard shouted from the gate. Elara didn't stop. She scrambled over wet cobblestones, her breath tearing at her lungs. She turned a corner into a narrow alleyway, slipping on the slick stones, scraping her hands against the rough brick wall. She could hear shouting behind her now. Sterling would not let his property escape so easily. She emerged onto a wider street, Pall Mall, usually bustling but now abandoned to the storm. She needed a hackney, a carriage, anything. But the street was empty, save for the driving rain. Clip-clop, clip-clop, the heavy rhythm of horses approaching. Elara ran into the center of the road, waving her arms frantically. "Stop! Please, stop!" A massive black carriage, drawn by 4 coal-black stallions, loomed out of the fog. The coachman shouted, pulling hard on the reins. The horses reared, their hooves striking sparks against the stone, coming to a halt mere inches from Elara's face. She stood there, trembling, soaked to the bone, mud staining her hem, her chest heaving. The carriage door opened. It wasn't a hastily opened latch. It was a slow, deliberate movement. A man stepped out. He did not carry an umbrella. He wore a long, dark greatcoat with the collar turned up. He was tall, imposingly so, broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. His face was illuminated by the carriage lantern, sharp cheekbones, a jaw set in granite, and eyes that were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. Elara's heart stopped. She knew that face. Everyone in England knew that face. Sebastian Thorn, the Duke of Blackwood. Rumour had it he had killed a man in a duel in Vienna. Rumour had it he was disowned by his own father before inheriting the title by sheer force of will. He was solitary, obscenely wealthy, and ruthless in the House of Lords. He was the most feared duke in England. He looked down at her, unbothered by the rain soaking his expensive coat. "Madam," his voice was a deep baritone, cutting through the sound of the storm. "You have a death wish, or you are incredibly foolish. Which is it?" Elara heard the shouts getting louder from the alleyway she had just exited. Sterling's men. She looked at the terrifying Duke, then back toward the darkness where her fiancé waited. It was a choice between a known monster and an unknown devil. She looked Sebastian Thorn in the eye. "I am in danger. Please, just take me away from here." The Duke's eyes narrowed. He looked past her, seeing the flicker of lanterns approaching from the alley. He assessed the situation in a heartbeat. A high-born lady, terrified, fleeing a royal event, covered in mud. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask for payment. He simply stepped aside and gestured to the open door of his carriage. "Get in." The interior of the Duke's carriage was warmer than the fires of the royal pavilion, upholstered in dark leather and smelling of sandalwood and tobacco. Elara huddled in the corner, shivering violently. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the bone-deep chill of the rain and the crushing realization of what she had just done. She had ruined herself. By entering the carriage of a bachelor duke, unchaperoned, she was socially dead. Sebastian Thorn sat opposite her. He had removed his wet greatcoat and thrown it on the floor, sitting in a pristine black evening suit. He didn't stare at her. but she could feel his gaze, heavy and analytical. He poured a small amount of amber liquid from a crystal decanter into a glass. "Drink," he said, extending the glass. Elara's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She took a sip. It was brandy, fire liquid that burned her throat but settled the trembling in her stomach. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. "You know who I am," he stated. It wasn't a question. Everyone knows the Duke of Blackwood. "And yet," Sebastian leaned back, crossing his legs, "you threw yourself in front of my horses. The wolves behind you must have been particularly hungry." "One wolf," Elara corrected, staring into the amber liquid. "Lord Stirling." The air in the carriage shifted instantly. The casual indifference vanished from Sebastian's posture. He sat up straighter, his eyes sharpening. "Reginald Stirling?" Elara nodded. I was to be engaged to him tonight. I couldn't do it. I ran." Sebastian remained silent for a long time. The carriage rattled over the cobblestones, the rain drumming a rhythmic beat on the roof. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, laced with a cold fury she didn't understand. "Stirling is a man who discards things when they no longer amuse him," Sebastian said. "You were wise to run. Though running to me might be akin to jumping from the frying pan into the fire. I am not afraid of you," Elara lied. A ghost of a smile, or perhaps a sneer, touched his lips. "You should be. I am not a saviour of damsels, lady. Vance, Elara Vance. Vance," he tasted the name. "The Earl of Vance's daughter. That explains the debt. Your father has been bleeding money at the card tables for years. Selling you to Stirling was his final play." Elara flinched. The blunt truth hurt more than the cold. "I am not a piece of property. In this world, Elara, we are all property. The only difference is who holds the deed." He looked out the window as the carriage began to slow. "We are arriving." Elara looked out. They weren't at her father's townhouse. They were entering the iron gates of a massive estate on the edge of London. Blackwood House. It was a fortress of dark stone, intimidating and grand. "Why have you brought me here?" Panic flared in her chest. "I cannot stay here. The scandal." "The scandal is already written," Sebastian said, opening the door as the carriage halted. "If I take you home, your father will send you back to Stirling by morning. Is that what you want?" "No," she breathed. "Then you stay here, under my protection." "Why?" Elara asked, searching his face for some ulterior motive. Why would the Duke of Blackwood protect a bankrupt earl's runaway daughter? Sebastian stepped out, turning to offer her his hand. His grip was warm, firm, and shockingly gentle. "Because," he said, his eyes dark with a secret history she couldn't yet read, "I have been waiting a very long time for something to take from Reginald Stirling, and tonight fate dropped his most prized possession right at my feet." Elara hesitated on the carriage step. She realized then that she wasn't a guest. She was a weapon in a war she didn't know existed. "Come, Lady Elara," Sebastian said, the rain misting around them. "Let us give London something to truly whisper about." She took his hand. The massive oak doors of Blackwood House swung open, revealing a foyer of black and white marble. A line of servants stood waiting, their faces masks of professional indifference, though Elara could see the flicker of shock in their eyes as the master brought in a soaked, shivering woman in a ruined ball gown. "Mrs. Halloway," Sebastian barked. A stern woman with grey hair and a stiff white apron stepped forward. "Your Grace, prepare the blue chambers. Lady Vance will be staying with us indefinitely. Draw a hot bath immediately. Burn these clothes and find her something dry." "Burn them?" Elara protested weakly. "That silk cost my father," Your father traded your life for a gambling chit. Sebastian cut her off, turning to face her. The height difference was overwhelming. He towered over her, smelling of rain and power. Anything that connects you to him, or to Sterling, is to be destroyed. Tonight, you are reborn. Or have you changed your mind? Elara looked at the wet, muddy ruin of her dress. It was the uniform of a victim. "Burn it," she said, her voice gaining strength. Sebastian nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good. Rest, Elara. Tomorrow, the war begins." He turned on his heel and marched toward his study, the heavy doors slamming shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the hall. Elara stood shivering in the foyer. She was safe from Sterling, yes. But as she looked up at the looming portraits of the Blackwood ancestors, men with cruel eyes and hard mouths, she wondered if she had simply traded a butcher for a general. Mrs. Halloway stepped forward, her expression softening just a fraction. "Come this way, my lady. The water will be warm." As Elara followed the housekeeper up the grand staircase, she didn't know that in the study below, Sebastian Thorn was pouring himself another drink, staring at the fire and whispering a promise to the flames. "Checkmate, Sterling." Elara woke to the sound of a heavy curtain being drawn back, flooding the room with grey, unforgiving London light. For a moment, suspended in the haze of sleep, she reached for the comforting familiarity of her own bedchamber in her father's townhouse. But the sheets were silk, not cotton, and the air smelled of lavender and beeswax, not the stale gin that usually permeated her home. Memory crashed into her like a wave. The banquet, Sterling, the rain, the Duke. She sat up abruptly, gasping. She was in a bed large enough to sleep 4 people, in a room decorated in shades of sapphire and cream. A maid, young and terrified-looking, was busying herself with a tray on a low table. "Good morning, my lady," the maid squeaked, dropping a curtsy so low she nearly toppled over. "His Grace requests your presence in the breakfast parlour as soon as you are ready. He said to tell you the vultures are circling." Elara's stomach twisted. She threw off the covers and went to the wash basin. The reflection staring back at her was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but the fear from last night had hardened into something brittle. On the chaise lounge lay a dress, a morning gown of deep emerald velvet, cut in the latest fashion, far finer than anything her father could afford. "Where did this come from?" Elara asked, running her hand over the fabric. "His Grace sent a runner to Madame Leclerc's on Bond Street at dawn, my lady," the maid whispered. "He ordered a full wardrobe. He said you were not to look like a refugee." Elara dressed in silence. The velvet was heavy, armor against the world. When she finally descended the grand staircase, the house was eerily quiet, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock. She found Sebastian Thorn in the breakfast parlour, a room dominated by a massive mahogany table and a roaring fire. He was reading a newspaper, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He looked irritatingly fresh, wearing a crisp white cravat and a dark morning coat. He didn't look up as she entered. He simply slid the newspaper across the polished table toward her seat. "Read it," he commanded. Elara took the seat opposite him. She looked down at the Morning Post. The headline was not subtle. "The Runaway Debutante. Lady Vance flees royal banquet. Society is reeling this morning following the shocking disappearance of Lady Elara Vance from Carlton House. Witnesses claim the Earl's daughter was seen fleeing into the storm moments before her engagement to Lord Sterling was to be announced. Has the diamond of the season cracked, or has a darker fate befallen her?" "I am ruined," Elara whispered, the paper trembling in her hands. "Truly completely ruined. No decent family will speak to me. I will be a pariah. You were ruined the moment you stepped into my carriage, Sebastian said, finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, calculating. A single woman, unchaperoned, spending the night in the home of the Duke of Blackwood? The gossip rags are already speculating that you are my mistress. Ilara stood up, knocking her chair back. And you sit there drinking coffee? You must denounce it. Tell them I sought sanctuary. Tell them what? Sebastian cut in, his voice sharp. That you ran from your betrothed? Sterling will spin that to make you look hysterical, mentally unstable. He will have you committed to an asylum within the week to hush you up, and then he will take your father's estate as compensation. Ilara collapsed back into the chair. She knew he was right. Sterling was vindictive. If she couldn't be his wife, she would be his victim. So, what do we do? She asked, her voice hollow. Why did you save me if only to watch me drown in scandal? Sebastian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, manicured gardens of his estate. I didn't say you were drowning, Ilara. I said you were ruined. There is a difference. Freedom often requires a little ruin. He turned back to her. I have a proposition. I have nothing to pay you with, she said bitterly. I don't want your money. I want your reputation, or rather, I want the debris of it. He walked closer, leaning his hands on the table, invading her space. Sterling needs to be destroyed, not just embarrassed, destroyed. He has political ambitions. He aims to be Prime Minister. But a man who loses his bride to a rival, a man who is publicly cuckolded by the Duke of Blackwood, that man looks weak. Ilara's eyes widened. You want to use me to humiliate him. I want us to use each other, Sebastian corrected. You need protection. I need a weapon. I propose a charade. We will not deny the rumors. We will fuel them. We will appear in public together. We will let London believe that you didn't run away from Sterling, but that you ran to me, that you chose me. They will call me a whore, Ilara said bluntly. Let them, Sebastian shrugged. Whatever they call you, they will not be able to touch you, not while you are under the protection of my name. And when Sterling is ruined, when his creditors call in his debts because he has lost the confidence of the lords, you will be free. And what happens to me then? Ilara challenged him. After you have had your revenge? I will be a discarded mistress with no future. Sebastian's expression shifted. For a second, the mask of the ruthless Duke slipped, revealing something complex and pained beneath. I do not discard people, Ilara, unlike the men you are used to. Stick with me, play this part, and I settle your father's debts. You will walk away with a clean ledger and a dowry large enough to go to America or the continent and start over where no one knows your name. It was a deal with the devil. But as Ilara looked at the emerald velvet of her sleeve, bought by this man who barely knew her, she realized the devil was offering her more respect than her own father ever had. She lifted her chin. I won't be a silent prop, Your Grace. If we are to do this, we do it my way. I will not cower. Sebastian smiled, a genuine, wolfish grin that made him look devastatingly handsome. I would expect nothing less. Eat your eggs, Ilara. We are going to the park. It is time to feed the lions. The drive to Hyde Park was an exercise in torture. Every head turned as the Blackwood carriage, emblazoned with the ducal crest, rolled through the gates. It was the fashionable hour, 5 p.m., when the ton gathered to see and be seen. When Sebastian helped Ilara down from the carriage, the silence that fell over the promenade was deafening. Ilara held her head high. She wore a walking dress of charcoal silk, stark and dramatic, her hand resting lightly on Sebastian's arm. She could feel the vibration of his muscles, tense and ready. Breathe, he murmured, dipping his head toward her, as if whispering a lover's secret. "Do not look at them. Look at me." She looked up at him. His eyes were an anchor in the storm of whispers. For a moment, the rest of the world blurred. "There!" A voice shattered the moment. Lord Reginald Stirling was marching towards them, pushing through the crowd. He looked deranged. His cravat was slightly askew, his face flushed a mottled purple. He was followed by two burly men who looked more like dock workers than footmen. "You!" Stirling roared, pointing a shaking finger at Ilara. "You treacherous little witch!" Sebastian stepped in front of Ilara, a subtle movement that placed his broad frame between her and Stirling's rage. "Careful, Stirling." Sebastian's voice was low, but it carried effortlessly. "You are addressing my guest." "Guest?" Stirling laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "She is my betrothed. She is a runaway. I have a contract signed by her father. She belongs to me." He lunged forward, reaching for Ilara's arm. Faster than Ilara could track, Sebastian's hand shot out. He caught Stirling's wrist in a grip of iron, twisting it just enough to force the older man to wince and stumble. "Touch her!" Sebastian said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "And I will break your arm in 3 places before your guards can draw a breath." The crowd gasped. Ladies covered their mouths with fans. Gentlemen stepped closer, hungry for blood. Stirling tried to yank his arm back, but Sebastian held fast. "You have kidnapped her, Blackwood. This is abduction. I will have the magistrate on you within the hour." "It is not abduction if the lady came willingly," Sebastian said, calmly, releasing Stirling's wrist with a shove of disgust. "Willingly?" Stirling sneered, rubbing his wrist. "She is a foolish girl who doesn't know what is good for her. She has a duty. Her father owes me £50,000. She is the payment." The crude admission hung in the air. Ilara felt the heat of shame burn her cheeks, but she stepped out from behind Sebastian. "I am not currency, Lord Stirling," she said, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger. "I would rather work in a scullery than be your wife." "You have no choice," Stirling screamed, losing all composure. "Your father has signed the papers. You are mine by law. Unless Blackwood here plans to pay your father's debt? Is that it? Paying for a mistress, are we?" Sebastian reached into his inner coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of thick parchment. "Funny you should mention that," Sebastian said, checking his fingernails as if bored. "I took a detour to White's Club this morning, and then to the Bank of England. I had a fascinating conversation with the Earl of Vance." Stirling froze. "What have you done?" "I bought the debt," Sebastian said simply. Silence descended again, absolute and heavy. "I bought the promissory notes," Sebastian continued, tapping the paper against his palm. "Every shilling the Earl owed you, he now owes me. And since I hold the debt, I also hold the collateral." He turned to Ilara, his eyes softening for the briefest second. The contract regarding Lady Ilara's hand in marriage was tied to the debt. Since the debt has changed hands, the contract is null and void. Stirling's face went white. You cannot do that. That is a fortune. Why? Why would you spend £50,000 on her?" Sebastian took a step forward, forcing Stirling to retreat. "Because, Reginald, taking from you is the only hobby I truly enjoy. You are finished here. Leave." Stirling looked around. He saw the sneers of the crowd. He saw the power radiating off Sebastian. He realized he had been outmaneuvered in front of all of London. "This isn't over, Blackwood," Stirling hissed, backing away. "You think you've won? You've just invited a viper into your bed. Ask her father about the madness in her bloodline." With that parting venom, Stirling turned and fled to his carriage, his guards scrambling after him. Elara stood frozen. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her knees weak. Sebastian turned to her, offering his arm again. "Come," he said quietly. "The show is over. We must leave before the applause starts." Back in the safety of the carriage, the silence was thick. Elara stared at Sebastian. He was staring out the window, his jaw tight. "Did you mean it?" she asked softly. "Did you really pay £50,000? "Yes." "Why?" Elara demanded. "You said you wanted revenge, but that is a king's ransom. You barely know me. There is something you aren't telling me." Sebastian sighed, a heavy, weary sound that made him seem older than his 30 years. He turned to look at her, and the darkness in his eyes was profound. "Do you remember the scandal of 1809? The death of Lydia Thorne?" Elara searched her memory. "Your sister?" "It was a tragic accident. She fell from a horse." "It was not an accident." Sebastian's voice was like crushed glass. "Lydia was 17. She was being courted by a charming, ambitious man who promised her the world. He seduced her, compromised her, and then, when he found a wealthier heiress, he threatened to expose her shame if she didn't leave him alone." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. "Sterling. Lydia was terrified. She was pregnant. She took her own life," Sebastian said, the words landing like stones. Sterling laughed about it at his club a week later. He called her a fragile thing. He suffered no consequences. Men like him never do. He looked at Elara, his gaze intense. "I swore on her grave that I would take everything he ever wanted. His reputation, his political career. And when I saw you last night, terrified, running from him just as Lydia must have wanted to run, I knew." He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near hers but not touching. "I am not just saving you, Elara. I am saving her. Over and over again." Elara looked at this terrifying, powerful man and saw the grief that drove him. Her fear of him evaporated, replaced by something dangerous, something warm. She reached out and took his hand. "Then let us destroy him. Sebastian," she whispered, using his Christian name for the first time. "Together." He squeezed her hand, a pact sealed in blood and money. "Together," he agreed. But as the carriage turned toward Blackwood House, neither of them noticed the shadowy figure following on horseback, keeping a safe distance, watching their every move. Sterling was not a man who gave up his prizes easily, and he had one card left to play, one that involved Elara's father, and a secret that could shatter her newfound alliance with the Duke. For 3 weeks, Blackwood House became a fortress against the world. Yet within its walls, a strange, quiet domesticity began to bloom. The scandal raged outside. Newspapers were printing daily cartoons of Sebastian as a dragon guarding a maiden. But inside, the air was thick with unsaid words and lingering glances. Elara found herself in the library late one rainy Tuesday. She was reading Ivanhoe, though her eyes had been stuck on the same page for 20 minutes. Sebastian was at his desk, reviewing tenant ledgers. He had discarded his coat. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms scarred from his duel years ago. "You are staring, Elara," he said, not looking up from his papers. "I am observing," she corrected, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "You work harder than my father ever did. He believed labor was for the lower classes." Sebastian set down his quill. "Your father believes the world owes him a living. I believe the world owes me nothing but what I can take and hold." He stood and walked over to the fireplace, where she sat. The distance between them had shrunk over the weeks. He no longer looked at her as a victim to be saved, but as an equal to be challenged. "The season ends in 10 days, Sebastian said, watching the flames. "Sterling has been quiet. too quiet. It unsettles me. Perhaps he has accepted defeat, Ilara suggested hopefully. Sebastian laughed, a dark, humorless sound. Men like Sterling do not accept defeat. They merely change the battlefield. He is looking for a crack in the armor, and since he cannot break me, he will try to break you through someone else. As if summoned by the devil himself, a heavy pounding echoed from the front door, reverberating through the house. Sebastian's posture instantly shifted from relaxed to lethal. He moved toward the door of the library just as Mrs. Halloway burst in, looking flustered. "Your Grace, it is the Earl of Vance." Ilara dropped her book. "My father? He is demanding to see Lady Ilara," the housekeeper said, looking disapprovingly at the hallway behind her. "He is not in a good state." "Let him in," Sebastian ordered. The Earl of Vance stumbled into the room. He looked 10 years older than the last time Ilara had seen him at the banquet. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, and he smelled of cheap gin and fear. "Ilara," he gasped, falling into a chair uninvited. "Oh God, you must come home. You must come back to Sterling." Ilara stood, her hands trembling. "I will never go back. The Duke paid my debt. You are free, father. Why are you here? The debt. The money is not the problem anymore." The Earl buried his face in his hands, sobbing. "Sterling knows." He found the ledger. Sebastian stepped forward, his voice ice-cold. "What ledger, Vance?" The Earl looked up at Sebastian, terror in his watery eyes. "The consolidated annuities. Last year, I was desperate. I needed credit to cover a loss at the racetrack. I forged a signature on a bond." The room went deadly silent. Forgery of financial bonds was not just a crime, it was a capital offense. Men were hanged at Newgate Prison for less. "Whose signature?" Sebastian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "The Duke of York," the Earl whispered. "The Prince Regent's brother." Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. "Treason. You committed treason." "I intended to pay it back before anyone noticed," the Earl wailed. "But I couldn't. And now, Sterling has the bond. He bought it from the moneylender this morning. He sent a message. If Ilara does not return to him by midnight tonight, he goes to the magistrate. I will hang Ilara. I will hang, and you will be the daughter of a traitor. Your name will be struck from the rolls. You will be destitute, exiled." He looked at Sebastian. "And you, Your Grace, harboring the daughter of a traitor? Using your money to cover the debts of a felon? Sterling will paint you as a co-conspirator. He will drag the Blackwood name through the mud until you are as ruined as I am." Sebastian didn't move. He looked at the weeping man with absolute disgust. "You sold your daughter once for money," Sebastian said. "Now you wish to sell her again for your life." "I have no choice," the Earl cried. "There is always a choice," Sebastian snarled. "Get out of my sight. Go to the kitchen. Mrs. Halloway will give you coffee. Do not leave this house." As the Earl was led away, sobbing, Ilara sank onto the sofa. The walls were closing in. "He has checkmated us," she whispered. "If I stay, my father dies, and your reputation is destroyed. If I go—" "If you go," Sebastian knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "Sterling wins. He will lock you away. You will vanish." "But I cannot let him destroy you," Ilara said, tears spilling over. "You have done so much. You saved me. I cannot repay you by being the anchor that drags you down." "I told you," Sebastian said fiercely, gripping her hands tighter. "We do this together. We do not negotiate with terrorists." "He holds a death warrant, Sebastian. There is no negotiation." "Then we change the terms." Sebastian stood up, pacing the room, his mind working furiously. Sterling has the bond. That is his leverage. We need to get it back. It will be in his safe, Ilara said. In his townhouse, guarded. Then we must become thieves, Sebastian turned to her, a reckless light in his eyes. I know Sterling's schedule. Tonight is the Lord Mayor's dinner. He will be there to gloat, expecting you to crawl back to his house while he is out dining. His house will be lightly staffed. You cannot mean to break in, Ilara gasped. You are a duke. Tonight I am not a duke. I am a man protecting what is his. He walked to a hidden panel in the bookshelf, pressing a latch. It clicked open to reveal a collection of darker tools, a set of lockpicks, a pistol, and black leather gloves. I spent my youth in Vienna doing things that would make polite society faint, Sebastian said, pulling on the gloves. Ilara, you must trust me. Stay here. Lock the door. I will bring the bond back, and we will burn it together. He looked at her one last time, his gaze burning with an intensity that stopped her heart. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead, a benediction, and a promise. Wait for me. Then he was gone into the night, leaving Ilara alone with the ticking clock and the terrified realization that he was walking into a trap. The clock struck 11. Ilara paced the library floor, wearing a track in the Persian rug. Every creak of the house sounded like a gunshot. Her father was passed out in the servants' quarters, useless and drunk. A sharp rap at the window made her jump. She rushed to the glass. It wasn't Sebastian. It was a street urchin, soaked to the bone, holding up a sealed letter against the pane. Ilara undid the latch and threw the window open. What is it? Letter for Lady Vance, the boy said, teeth chattering. Gentleman said it was life or death. Gave me a sovereign. Ilara snatched the letter. The seal was red wax. The crest was a wolf. Sterling. She tore it open. My dear Ilara, did you really think I would leave the bond in my safe? I know Blackwood. I know he has a hero complex. I expected him to come. My men are waiting for him. By the time you read this, the Duke will be in custody for attempted burglary and assault. A Duke breaking into a home? The scandal will be delicious. He will be stripped of his title. He will rot in Newgate alongside your father. Unless, come to me. Now. Alone. Bring yourself to the carriage waiting at the end of the lane. If you are in my drawing room by midnight, I will drop the charges against Blackwood and burn the bond. If you are late, I hang them both. Your devoted Reginald Ilara stared at the paper, the ink running slightly in the damp air. He had anticipated everything. Sebastian walked right into the ambush. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A cold, deadly calm settled over her. She had spent her whole life being a pawn, first her father's, then Sterling's, then even Sebastian's, though he was a kind player. It was time to be the queen. She went to Sebastian's desk. She took a piece of paper and wrote a single line. Forgive me. I love you enough to leave you. She placed it on his pillow upstairs. Then she went to the hidden cabinet Sebastian had opened earlier. He had taken the pistol, but he had left a small, pearl-handled dagger, a lady's weapon, sharp and concealable. She slid the dagger into her boot. She grabbed her cloak and walked out of the front door of Blackwood House. The rain had stopped, leaving a thick, choking fog. At the end of the lane, a carriage with no lights waited. The door opened. She stepped inside. Sterling's townhouse was silent as a tomb. The carriage driver escorted her through the back entrance, straight into the study. Reginald Sterling was sitting by the fire, swirling a glass of port. He looked triumphant. On the desk sat the forged bond. You came, he smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. I knew you would. You have a martyr's heart, Elara. It's what makes you so breakable. Where is he? Elara asked, her voice steady. Where is Sebastian? Blackwood. Sterling chuckled. Oh, he's currently in my cellar. My men gave him quite a thrashing. He fights like a demon, I'll give him that. But numbers always win. Let him go, Elara said. I am here. That was the deal. The deal, Sterling stood up, walking slowly toward her, has changed. You see, I realized something tonight. I don't want a wife. Wives are tedious. They have rights. They have families. He stopped inches from her, smelling of port and cruelty. I want a patient. I have spoken to Dr. Crane at the Bedlam Asylum. He agrees that your behavior, running away, cohabiting with a known rake, hysterical delusions, requires aggressive treatment. You will be admitted tonight under a pseudonym. I will control your estate. I will control your father. And Blackwood. He will be charged with kidnapping you and holding you against your will. You will be too unwell to testify otherwise. Elara looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him clearly. He wasn't just a bully. He was a monster. You underestimate me, Reginald, she said softly. Do I? He reached for her face. Elara moved. She didn't pull away. She stepped in. Her hand went to her boot. In one fluid motion, she drew the pearl-handled dagger and brought it up. She didn't aim for his heart. She wasn't a killer. She aimed for his pride. She slashed the blade across the hand, reaching for her face. Sterling howled, recoiling, clutching his bleeding hand. You little bitch! Guards! You said the house was empty, Elara shouted, backing toward the desk. You wanted no witnesses to your victory. She grabbed the forged bond from the desk. Sterling lunged at her, his face twisted in a mask of fury. Give me that! Elara threw the paper into the roaring fireplace. No! Sterling screamed, diving for the grate. But the paper was old and dry. It caught instantly, curling into black ash within seconds. The evidence of her father's treason and Sterling's leverage vanished up the chimney. Sterling turned on her, his eyes murderous. He was no longer playing a game. He was going to kill her. You've ruined everything, he hissed, pulling a heavy iron poker from the fireplace stand. If I can't have the money, I'll have the satisfaction of crushing your skull. Elara backed up until she hit the heavy oak door. It was locked. She raised the small dagger, her hand shaking violently now. It was a toothpick against a bludgeon. Sterling raised the poker. Crash! The window of the study shattered inward in a shower of glass and wood. A dark shape swung in from the balcony, landing in a crouch amidst the debris. Sebastian Thorn rose to his full height. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. His shirt was torn, and his knuckles were raw. He looked like the god of war. "Get away from her!" Sebastian roared, a sound so primal it shook the walls. Sterling froze, the poker raised. "How? My men! Your men are unconscious." Sebastian stepped over the glass, his eyes fixed on Sterling. "And now, Reginald, it is just you and me." Sterling looked at the poker, then at Sebastian, then at Elara holding the dagger. He realized the dynamic had shifted. He was no longer the predator. He swung the poker at Sebastian. Sebastian didn't dodge. He caught the iron bar in his gloved hand, stopping the blow dead. He wrenched it from Sterling's grip and tossed it aside like a twig. Then Sebastian punched him. It was a single, precise blow to the jaw. Sterling crumpled to the floor, out cold before he hit the carpet. The silence that followed was heavy with dust and adrenaline. Sebastian stood over the fallen man for a moment, chest heaving, before turning to Elara. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by a frantic terror. "Elara," he breathed, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed her face, his hands shaking, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine," she sobbed, the dagger clattering to the floor as her strength finally gave out. "I burned it, Sebastian. The bond. It's gone." Sebastian pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her ribs. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of her, assuring himself she was real. "You foolish, brave woman," he whispered into her hair. "I woke up and found your note. I thought I had lost you. I thought I was too late. You came for me," she wept. "I would tear down London brick by brick to find you," he said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "I love you, Elara. I don't care about the scandal. I don't care about the debt. I only care that you are safe." Elara froze. The words hung in the air, more powerful than any weapon. "You love me?" "I have loved you since the moment you ran into the rain and looked at me without fear," Sebastian confessed, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Marry me, Elara. Not for protection. Not for revenge. Marry me because we are the only two people in this city who understand each other." Elara looked at the unconscious Sterling, then at the ash in the fireplace, and finally at the man who had walked through hell to get to her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Sebastian." He kissed her then. Not a gentle kiss, but a fierce, reclaiming thing, sealed with blood and ash and the promise of a future. But as they stood in the ruins of Sterling's study, a slow clapping sound came from the open doorway. They broke apart, spinning around. Standing there was a tall, thin man with silver hair, flanked by 2 officers of the Royal Guard. It was the Duke of York himself, the man whose signature had been forged. "A very dramatic performance," the Royal Duke said, stepping into the room. "Burning evidence, assaulting a peer of the realm. You two have had a busy evening." Elara's heart stopped. They had destroyed the evidence, but the witness, the victim of the forgery, was standing right there. "Your Highness," Sebastian said, placing Elara behind him, his body shielding her. "Relax, Blackwood," the Duke of York said, looking down at the unconscious Sterling with disdain. "I have been watching Mr. Sterling for a long time. A man who blackmails earls usually has other skeletons in his closet. We raided his offices while he was busy with you. We found ledgers, blackmail on half the House of Lords." The Royal Duke looked at Elara. "And as for the bond, let us say that I have a poor memory for signatures. I recall signing a loan for the Earl of Vance. It was all quite legitimate, wasn't it?" Elara realized what he was doing. He was granting them mercy. He was erasing the crime. "Yes, Your Highness," Elara curtsied low, tears of relief stinging her eyes. "Quite legitimate." "Good," the Duke of York nodded. "Officer, arrest Mr. Sterling for extortion and fraud when he wakes up. Blackwood, take your lady home. You both look like you need a drink." As the Royal Duke turned to leave, Sebastian took Elara's hand. They walked out of the house, past the guards, past the wreckage, and into the cool, clean air of the London night. The scandal would be immense. The papers would talk about it for years. But as Elara leaned her head on Sebastian's shoulder, she knew that the story of the Duchess of Scandals was just beginning. And this time, she wasn't running away. 6 months later, the rain that had defined the night of Elara's escape was a distant memory, replaced by the crisp, golden sunlight of a London autumn. But the crowd outside St. George's, Hanover Square, was just as dense, if not denser, than the mob at the royal banquet. They had come to see the scandal of the century culminate in a wedding. Inside the church, the air was cool and smelled of lilies. The pews were packed. Half the ton had come out of genuine support for the Duke, whose power remained absolute. The other half had come out of morbid curiosity, eager to see the woman who had brought down Reginald Sterling. Sterling was currently rotting in Newgate Prison, awaiting transportation to a penal colony in Australia for fraud and extortion. The Morning Post had detailed his fall with glee, noting that he had screamed Ilara's name as the gavel fell. Ilara stood at the altar, her hand resting in the crook of her father's arm. The Earl of Vance looked different, thinner, older, but his eyes were clear. He had not touched a card or a bottle since the night in the library. He was a man living on a second chance, and he knew it. "You look beautiful, Ilara," he whispered, his voice thick with regret and pride. "I do not deserve to walk you down this aisle." "No," Ilara said softly, looking ahead to where Sebastian stood. "But you are here, and that is enough." She stepped forward. Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood, looked devastating in formal velvet. He watched her approach with a look that silenced the whispering congregation. There was no coldness in his eyes today, only a fierce, possessive adoration. He didn't look like a man taming a scandal. He looked like a man claiming a victory. When Ilara reached him, he took her hand. His grip was the same as it had been in the carriage that first night, firm, warm, an anchor. "Ready to face them?" he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "I faced a madman with a dagger." She smiled, her heart swelling. "A few duchesses with monocles do not frighten me." The ceremony was brief but solemn. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, and Sebastian kissed her, a ripple of genuine applause broke out, starting from the back where the Duke of York sat and spreading forward. As they exited the church, the roar of the crowd outside washed over them. But this time, Ilara didn't shrink back. She didn't run. They climbed into the open carriage, the same black carriage, pulled by the same black horses. As the wheels began to turn, taking them away from the noise and toward their future, Sebastian wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You know what they are calling you now?" Sebastian asked, a playful glint in his eyes. "I dread to think," Ilara laughed. "The runaway bride? The dagger debutante?" "No," Sebastian kissed her temple. "They call you the Iron Duchess, the only woman who ever tamed the Devil of Blackwood." Ilara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought of the frightened girl shivering in the rain, and the woman she was now, powerful, loved, and free. "Let them talk," Ilara whispered, watching London pass by. "I have given them a story, but I have kept the best part for myself." "And what is that?" "You," she said. The carriage turned the corner, disappearing into the golden afternoon, leaving the scandal behind and carrying the Duke and Duchess into a life that was finally, truly, their own. And that is the story of Lady Ilara and the Duke of Blackwood. It's a reminder that sometimes your life doesn't truly begin until you stop doing what you're told and start fighting for what you deserve. Ilara had to lose her reputation to find her freedom, and in doing so, she found a love worth burning down the world for. I hope you enjoyed this historical drama. If you did, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more stories like this. And I have a question for you. If you were in Ilara's shoes, would you have trusted the Duke, or would you have tried to survive on your own? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. I release new videos every week filled with drama, romance, and justice. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.